Okay, we're going to do the pen now. And if you've just tuned in, I have already done the pencil sketch for this portrait, and that is in the previous video. If you would like to check that out, that is the previous step. So now I'm just going to go in and take a micron pen or micron style pen and go over the lines that we have already added, and then we will erase all of our lighter lines that we use to measure. For the eyebrows, I like to do straight streaks. Just follow the line that you made. Just do straight lines. And a nice thing to remember about eyebrows is they are usually darker towards the center, and then they get lighter and more sparse towards the other way around. So they're usually darker towards the edges, and they're lighter and more sparse towards the middle. So I had it backwards. And then I just go ahead and do a slightly darker line for the eyelid. That is going to give you the illusion of an eyelash line. Being careful to make sure you get the tear troughs. I feel like that really makes a difference. Couple of lashes in there. Getting the eyelids. And then you're really going to see your pencil lines after we erase it. And I'm going to do the sides of the nose. And what I like to do with these pens, I don't like to do every single line straight up and down. Sometimes I like to skip areas. I'll do a little dot, so I'm not just doing straight lines everywhere. I don't want it to look too harsh. Doing the nostrils, they'll just be filled in black. Like especially for the nose, the ball of the nose, I like to just do a little like line up here to show the tip. And hers is upturned a little bit, so that's why it kind of looks like that. We're going to go in and do the lips. I like to start with the center of the lips first, and I like to trace the opposite of what the top looks like. So it's kind of at an angle, and then a point down, and then an angle. And then we're going to go in and just do the top. Again, I'm making it a little bit less geometric than the original lines. A little bit softer and more rounded. And then I'll do the tops of her ears. That's where I don't make a full continuous line. Sometimes I'll just do a little dot where I'm trying to show you the continuous line so it's not too heavy looking. And then down to the shape of her face, her jaw, either side of the neck. Just taking those guidelines and doing soft curving lines rather than anything too harsh. And it's a lot easier if you don't do just straight up and down lines. It's going to look more realistic if you curve your lines, like for the bra straps, make them curve around her shoulders, show where the fabric sits around the body. I'm going to add in her clavicle bone. So we already have this cross right here. You can do it with your pencil first, but it's almost just like a little line here and here going downwards in a V shape. That's going to add to the realism. We're going to do the bra cups. Lines where the cleavage are, again, kind of like in a triangle shape. Just a couple of lines to show anatomy marks. They go a long way. For the part, I like to do a bunch of lines that are sitting horizontally don't just draw a straight line up and down, but do those horizontal lines to kind of show where the hair is coming apart. And then just some wispy pieces. So we have that big blocky kind of shape for the hair, and then doing a couple of wispy pieces that kind of come off of it really help add to the realism and believability of it. So here's my wispy pieces that deviate from that original shape that I did. And I see there's some shine in the hair, so I'm going to tackle that. If you already have these horizontal lines for the part, make them as thin as you can. And make them different lengths. You don't want them all to be the same length because that's what's going to make it look kind of false and weird. So make some long, and then go down and make some short, and then some long again. And then do the same thing. Leave a spot right here, and then do the same thing on the other side right here where the light hits. And then one last thing is just pick a couple of lines to go all the way through, following the lines that you already did, and that's really going to help. And it looks like honestly the rest of the hair doesn't have a whole lot of highlights, so I'm just going to do a couple of lines that again follow the shape of the hair but no highlights in there, and it'll be quite dark when we're done with it. So I'm just going to do the same thing with the other side. There's not as much highlight on this side, so I'm not going to focus on it as much. Looks like this area is a little bit highlighted, so maybe when we paint it and add paint, we can just make it lighter. Okay, now we can erase it and see how it looks. Hopefully good. Take a kneaded eraser, especially if you're using watercolor paper like I am, so it doesn't rip your paper apart, and shred it. Then it will be a disaster to paint on. Have my weird ear outline over here. Okay, so look how much better it looks when we erase all those pencil marks. And then we can see if there are any spots where we didn't catch that we needed to go over in pen. Sometimes that happens. I can see one that I did right here. I'll just go back over it when I'm done. So she's looking pretty good. Okay, and that concludes the inking process for this portrait. And then next we're going to move on to watercolor. Okay, I have some watercolor paint set out here, and I'm trying to show you which ones I'm mixing together to make it a little bit easier. For this, I'm not going to be doing any heavy painting, just enough to add some color. I'm looking at her skin and it's quite pale, so we'll mix yellow and some scarlet together, and then add enough water to water it down a bit. And then we're just going to go and paint over her skin. We're going to just do like all of it. We're just going to do a layer over everything. Maybe skip the eyes, skip the lips, or not, whatever you want to do. And I'm just going to go over all of her skin with this, because we're going to come back over and add some like shadows and highlights too. And some of my pencil marks are kind of coming through because I made it darker so I could show you all of the lines that I did. So ideally yours will be a little bit lighter than this for your final painting and not so heavy, but I wanted to make sure you could really see what I was doing and they were dark enough lines. So if you see them, that is why. It's usually a good idea to use a softer lead for your pencil, like maybe an HB or something like that, because the the lead is softer, so it doesn't leave as heavy imprints. It'll be darker, but not as heavy and hard as like a smaller, as like a different type of pencil that is going to be like harder graphite, because that'll really scratch it in like I did with mine. I just didn't have any HBs or anything like that on hand, so that's why mine looks a little bit different. It's not too bad. So here we did the first layer for her skin. Let's go and do the first layer for her hair too. It's almost like a golden brown color, so we'll go ahead and mix up a little bit of yellow with the brown to make a golden brown color. Especially on those highlights, we want to make sure we hit it with that gold. We'll just go in and get the highlights, get this area of the hair where we saw the highlight earlier. Looks like there's a little bit of highlight here, just a little bit there. And then we'll go back in and do slightly more brown for the rest of it. Especially the underneath areas, so closer to her skin on the underlayer of the hair, it's going to be especially more dark. And then anywhere where the shadow obviously hits, it's going to be a darker brown. And this doesn't have to be perfect. We're just learning here and figuring out a process that's going to hopefully be helpful in the future. The way that I set the drawing portion up is something that I believe is going to work pretty well for any type of person or face you'd like to draw. Just setting it up geometrically with shapes and dividing the face into thirds. I just find that is the best way to get things looking symmetrical, which is the most challenging. And now I'm just adding another layer of darker brown, even more darker brown, into the under section of the hair where we want it to be darkest. This area looks like it has some shadow, so I'm just going to go up and just kind of streak this darker brown color up. I'm going to leave this just a little lighter, and I might streak some of this darker brown in here. And if you find that you want your highlight area to be a little bit lighter, which I'm thinking I do, I might get a little bit of paper towel, wet it, and then blot this area where I wanted my highlights to be, and you'll see that it'll lift some of that color up. This happens to me all the time. I go a little too heavy, and then I want to take some of it back. So that actually fixed my problem. Then just go ahead and add the darker color to the edges where you want the highlight to kind of stop, and then just a little bit of darker to the roots here, and extend it out just a little bit to follow those lines being a little bit like haphazard and not super even, because nature and humanity, we're not super even. Nothing is super perfect and symmetrical unless it is altered typically by the hand of mankind. So just remember that nothing is usually completely symmetrical, nothing's completely even. That's what I love about drawing and painting people. It gives so much room for forgiveness. I'm going to do her eyebrows now, just a little darker, using a tiny brush. I think this is the size 0. And if you're feeling brave, you can go in and try and hit the top of that lash line. Just add some depth to the top eyelid. And now we're going to think about highlights on the face. So I'm going to take that original skin tone we mixed up of the orange with the yellow. It's like a dark peach kind of color. And go back in And everything's going to dry a little lighter than we see here, so don't forget that. And we're just going to trace this side of her face, which is where I see more shadow, right here under the hairline. It's a little lighter on this side of the face, so I'm just going to keep that in mind as I go. I'm going to do less dark spots. This is like I wedged out where her cheekbone is. It's like a little triangle shape. And I'm going to keep it like that because I see shadow there, and that kind of highlights and shows her cheekbone, which we want to showcase. Lovely high cheekbones. We're going to go under the lips to represent the chin where there's shadow there, and then we're going to go all the way underneath the chin. There's usually always shadow underneath the chin where it meets the neck, and then on top of the collarbones, usually always something there. It's usually always like a highlight in the middle of the collarbone, so it's usually always light there. Okay, side of the neck, just a little more. In between the cleavage area, there's usually some shadow. Armpit area, anywhere where it's like there's like a recession in the body that goes inwards, there's going to be a shadow. Let's see, it looks like there's a little bit of shadow on either side here. Just a little bit there. Inside of the arms, shadow. Kind of on the underside of things, you're always going to see a shadow. And here I see a little bit of shadow on the other side of her arms. We're just going to do that. Now that these layers are drying, I'm going to go back in and do some pink for her lips. With that tiny size 0 brush. Adding a little bit of water to that. And mixing it to my skin tone. And that's going to be my blush area for the cheeks. Just adding a little bit there. Adding a little bit to the tops of the eyes. Adding a little bit to the sides of the nose. And you can even add a little bit to the shadows here. Just a little bit of that pink mixed in with the skin tone color and then watered down. Just kind of adding it to where I put my shadows. In some of the areas, just wherever you think you can use it. A little bit more here, on the side here. And extend this a little bit over that way. A little bit on that side of the nose, a little bit under the eye. And you can be as conservative as you like with this if you're nervous. The nice thing about watercolors, you can always like dab it off if you add too much color. It's pretty simple. It looks like she has like dark bluish eyes, so we could do that. We could just add some like bluish brown. That's kind of what they look like to me. It's kind of hard to tell with blue gray. So I just mixed some blue with brown and then added water. So now they look more gray. Adding some darkness to the tear trough area to make that eye shape kind of pop. And I added just a streak of that shadow color underneath the nose to kind of show where that shadow is. And now I would like to do just a little bit more darkness to the hair. Just the areas I was talking about before. Under here it's a little darker, and kind of keeping the highlighted areas that we blotted out, keeping their integrity. Okay, and then we just bring this up a little more. Just a little bit more here. And then finally, the bra and underwear that she's wearing, they're black. We could really pick whatever color we want. It doesn't have to be black. Maybe I'll make them this really pretty lavender, kind of lilac color, just because I like this color and I have some left over. So pick whatever color you want for her clothes. I'm using this one. She almost looks like more of a summer palette from her coloring here. So like I said, whatever you want to do. This is just kind of the final touch. We're almost done. And hopefully you found this tutorial helpful and felt that it helped you draw faces and people more confidently, knowing that it really just comes down to like a bunch of shapes and then softening out the sides and edges of those shapes to create anything you want. And if you look at things and you just kind of look for the shape language like inside of them, you can really figure out how to do pretty much anything. And then if you want to do just a little bit of shadow and highlight, this part's really fun. It's a little intimidating sometimes at first, but I'm just mixing a little bit of purple and blue and then watering it down, adding quite a bit of water, and then going over my shadows just a little bit with it, because shadows usually always have a color, and if we give the shadows a color, then it makes them look more realistic and believable. It's usually not just gray. So this might look gray, but it's actually purpley blue, just watered down pretty heavily, so it's not super saturated. And this just adds a little bit more realistic color dimension that I think just really helps us see this in a realistic light, and it makes your people look more lifelike. And we don't want them to look so lifelike necessarily that you think it's a camera image. I mean, you can do that if you want to, but that's not the point of my art, and I actually don't really like to do hyper realistic stuff. I like to do realism, but with a touch of fantasy. And adding these shadows is just going to give you that touch of realism to this. That makes her look like, oh, okay, this is a person, I can see what you're doing. But, you know, she's also just part of my imagination in some ways, and you're not too pressured to make it look exactly like the person that way, which I appreciate. Okay, just adding again just that watered down purpley blue to her. It might have been just a little too much, so we'll blot it out. And that's my favorite thing, is just blotting out whenever I add too much. It's just really nice. It takes the anxiety away of sometimes making a wrong choice, which we've all done before. Now I'm taking just a little bit of yellow, and when you color your highlights and shadows, you want to color both. So I'm doing the shadows purpley blue, and my highlights are going to be yellowish. So I'm just going over all the areas that are lighter and more highlighted with some yellow. That's a little too bright. It's okay. We'll just Let's go back through here, and we don't have to do all of the light areas in the yellow, just enough to look the way we want it to look. Make it a little brighter on her arms if we want. Maybe not quite that bright. Adding a little more water to it if it seems too dark. It's just going to show where the sunlight is really reflecting off of her. And that's all I'm doing right now. It's just adding some color to the highlights, the shadows, especially on her hair. Go ahead and add those pops of brighter yellow throughout. It's very pretty. It gives a very pretty effect, so don't be afraid to try it. And like I said, it will dry a little bit lighter than what you see, so don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of it. And I think that's looking very nice. So I think we're pretty much done with this. I hope you had a good time with this, and I hope you learned a lot. And I would love if you let me know in the comments what you thought of this tutorial, and if you attempted this, I'd love for you to tag me on Instagram and show me your work. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.